Well, hello, Sandy.
Amy, hello.
How are you doing today?
A good busy. How about you?
A good busy. Yes, we closed on our condo this morning. So good busy is good.
I've got a, I'll be back in Omaha. I've got a conference coming up, so that's
Yeah,
getting exciting. And
that's
being for
awesome.
10 days is always fun. Got a family reunion too, but one of my mom's siblings passed away this weekend, the first of the nine
Oh,
kids. So it has turned into a reunion plus a celebration of life. So
well, that's nice
it
that you're going to
wasn't
be
it
able to be
wasn't
back.
sudden, but the timing's good that everybody can be together to celebrate her life.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But that's
Very
life,
good.
right? If you can make the best made plans and they go different. You had a couple
Right.
different dates for your closing too, didn't you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because we had an initial date and we tried to move it up because we wanted to start painting while we were gone. And then that didn't happen. So we had to move it back. It's like, all right, that's fine. We're just not gonna rush this and it'll all be okay. So yeah. So the closing date and moving date have just been floating around there. Not, we still don't exactly know when we're moving, but it'll be before the end of May. That's all I know.
Right.
All right. So you shared an article and I was unable to open it. Do you want to tell us what this article is about? Because the title looked very interesting.
Okay, and not on microaggressions then. Sorry, hold on, let me open this one. Look at Amy.
Well,
We go into here and I had her
no, no,
article
no.
opened up. Hold on.
The first article was
Yes.
about speaking up.
Yep. And so the question was, and this came out of the New York Times, should I speak out when I overhear a person saying something hateful? So this was interesting because this isn't directed. We talk a lot about when things are directed at us, right?
Right.
And part of our discussion today is on small things, and this is a big thing, but you've overheard it. So at what point do you take a stand against homophobia, bigotry, when you overhear something being said? They use examples like at the barber shop or
Yeah.
at a coffee shop. Um, and it brought up quite a bit of conversation. And I think, the reality is, I guess it depends, right? And so they gave different examples in this article about some things where you absolutely should speak up when you've overheard it and you're very sure of what was just said and you can see the aggression. It's almost like a verbal abuse. If you were to see a physical abuse, you would stop it. So if you saw verbal abuse happening, you would stop it as well. But
Yeah.
we talked about a couple other instances where you didn't hear the whole conversation or you didn't know, what tone it was taken in. Maybe you didn't hear it right. At that point, then you really need to assess whether the person is, in an abusive state if they need help. So is your
Yeah.
word going to protect somebody? Are you jumping to conclusions, right?
Right.
So
That's
it's
a good. So have you ever watched What Would You Do?
no,
Uh,
what's that about?
oh, it's a TV show and they set up these situations and videotape them and they put their situations in a waiting room or at a barber shop or at a restaurant. A lot of times they're at restaurants and it's conversations that happen and it's so that other people can overhear these conversations of people saying things that should not be said or that are hateful or mean, whatever, even abusive some. And then they videotape what people do. And the one of them, the last time was somebody being rude to the person helping them. They were at a deli and she was being rude to the person. And it was like, would you speak up to this person and say something to protect this worker, who's doing their best, weren't doing anything. Anyway, they do this all the time. And it's interesting because I'm always like, what would I do? That's always the question that I ask myself because it's a hard, boundary of do I insert myself into this or do I stay out of it? And one of the things that I've seen a lot is the people who focus on the victim and they say, "Are you okay?"
Right.
And that's where I've picked up, instead of attacking the
Right,
person.
that's exactly what I was thinking, which is
Yeah,
always the easiest thing to do, but the right thing. Are
yeah,
you okay? Am I, because they can say whether something bad is happening, if they're okay, if they need help. You're finding out if
right.
they're in distress, right?
Yeah, right, right. Or like with the service worker, I noticed a lot of people didn't say anything to the lady attacking, but when it was their turn, they walked up and they're like, "You know what, you're doing a great job. Just disregard what she's saying." So they were trying to make up for that person, but they weren't, they didn't say anything to the one who was attacking, which is also, I think, is a problem, because if people are attacking and they don't realize that they're hurting people, like if that's their norm, then somebody needs to tell them that that's not right. So I don't know. That
I
I'm throwing my hands up. I don't know.
I do find myself being better about saying, keeping my calm and being able to say to the perpetrator, we need to stop. I found myself doing that in different interchanges or conversations when somebody kind of goes on the attack, just to kind of take a breath and say, let's just stop. Let's watch our words and our actions, and let's go positive, or
Yeah.
you need to stop what you're doing. I have become better with age, I think, in saying things, but I think I'm also better in holding my calm and not going from zero to pissed off,
Yeah.
because that doesn't help anything, right? Because then now
Right.
you've got an altercation, which sometimes that's what they're looking for, right?
Right. And you don't want to escalate the
Right,
situation and make it worse. Yeah.
right.
Which is sometimes hard. So this is kind of like the big stuff. When do you speak up? But this other piece is the small things, the microaggressions, and speaking up to that. And even if you're doing microaggressions, so the aggressions, you and I can see those. We know those are big, obvious, but microaggressions are a little bit sneakier. And a lot of times we don't realize that we're doing it, or that other people are doing it. And one that hit me, so just so you know, microaggressions are things that make
Yeah, because I
people
I
feel.
didn't know what these were. I had to read quite a bit. I had never heard of this before.
Oh, so this is, well, good. I'm glad this is new to you. That's fun. So microaggressions are things that, hold on, I've got a whole video that I shared, or that I will put a link to. But microaggressions are things that make people feel minimized. So an example would be somebody who is African American, and you say, "Oh, you're so well spoken." That's a microaggression, because the assumption is, because I look at you and you are who you are, I'm surprised that you're so well spoken, that you can talk like that.
Mhm. Kind of a
So it's
backhanded compliment. Backhanded compliments would fall in that order. Not all microaggressions are.
exactly,
Yeah.
yes, backhanded compliments, very much so. Or another one that caught me by surprise is, "Where are you from?" I never would have thought that that was a microaggression, but for some people, it's making an assumption that they're from somewhere else. And a lot of times I just mean, "Where are you from?" Like, what city are you from? But like somebody who has Asian descent might be offended by that, because it means that you think they're from another country. And, so asking, "Where are you located?" is a better way to ask that, so that so anyway, it's just interesting, the things that offend people. And what the other thing I've learned is, I can't define what offends other people, because these microaggressions are things that we may not think are offensive, but are received offensive. So anyway.
Attack of, and what caught my eye when I was reading an article about it is that it's not the big obvious stuff that make people feel excluded or disrespected, which are the things we're talking about in the
Yeah.
first article. It's the little things, but it's disrespectful toward their identity. So
Yeah.
the video that you sent, Amy, the one that caught my eye was the gay couple and how
Yeah.
people, and they use this a lot in comedies just to play on it, really play on the microaggression on, hey, oh, that's so cool. I love gay people. Or I bet you shop a lot. I have a friend who's gay and he loves to shop too.
Yeah.
Those types of, uh, and I thought, gosh, how often people make those comments because they want to, and they're excited, well, yeah, I have a sister
Yeah.
who's disabled too,
Yeah.
uh, I
Or
volunteered for Down syndrome once, you know.
yeah. Or meeting a gay man and saying, "Oh, I bet you'd be great at helping me decorate my house."
Right.
Like that's just making that assumption that everybody's like this.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you ask the question and they just said, I'm used to it. I'm thinking about, well, I guess we talked about American Fiction, the
Yeah.
movie. We talked about the
Yeah.
Oscars, and there were a lot of microaggressions in there. It was basically a microaggression that turned into a rage, right?
Right.
Because it was all the stereotypes and like, hey, bro, yeah,
Yeah.
I got a lot of black friends, and just and he lived it all the time.
Well, and the interesting thing about microaggressions is one, is just this little thing. And if you watch that video, it was like a mosquito bite. And
Right.
if you have one occasionally, it's not a big deal. But if you are getting one every day, it builds up to where then you're really frustrated and you're irritated. I would say irritated is a good word for mosquito bites. And then that's when that one little one that you might receive from somebody that they were not intending it, but you react at that one because you're so irritated at that point.
So then all these sayings, Amy, and I wrote them down because I thought of these, like, oh, come on, don't sweat the small stuff. You're getting upset over nothing. You're making a big deal, a mountain out of a molehill. Uh,
Yeah.
Mike, we have a culture that thinks that people are that projects people being overly sensitive if they feel slighted by microaggressions,
Yeah.
right? Don't we?
Yeah.
Another one. Come on, they meant good. They didn't mean bad, because a lot of these things we're saying aren't this in your face bad. They're the little mosquito bite, right?
Yeah.
But there's actually a negative to the person who has a negative reaction to it because we do have a culture that says get over yourself, and they meant good and everybody's okay as long as they mean well, right? They didn't mean anything bad by it. No harm, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're exactly right. But I think of microaggressions as a form of bias that you don't realize that you have. So if you're doing these microaggressions, then there's probably an underlying reason, and your intent is not bad, but this bias has created assumptions about people. And then you need to like really do some internal searching to see what is that bias and why am I doing that. And the one that I thought of, Sandy, was the my and ours. Remember, you were talking one time about saying my children and
It's
not,
pronouns. Yeah.
yeah, the use of instead of it's ours. So if it's an our type of thing, our money, our children, and saying my, it's actually a microaggression to your significant other because it's a level of disrespect, I would say. And microaggressions are about respecting people.
I would even do that with my parents or my grandma, and my
Yeah,
my brothers would be like, it's my mom too.
I
It's
know.
their
Exactly.
parents too. But
Yeah.
it's good that they call me on it. So part of this, these are not all intentional. Sometimes they're
Yeah.
just habit. Again, she meant well, but even though she means well, sometimes you got to call her to the carpet a little bit.
Right. And sometimes we're used to saying my whatever, because we're not with the
That
other
person,
player.
which is what
Yeah,
happened with me in my professional life. I was always
yeah,
talking about my kids, my life, you know,
yeah,
you're asked to tell your story a lot and then you get used to it. But
right.
it's very frustrating to the person who has the same relationship and you're excluding them.
Yeah, especially when they're sitting right there in the room. It's like that's probably a no.
No, I noticed that in a Christmas card once that I got in a Christmas card. Maybe I'm hypersensitive to this, and a super sweet family, but the whole card, it was signed from both parents. Everything, pictures was all parents, but everything was my kids, she, you know, and I thought, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it came across that way, which the person did not intend. Yeah, but I kept thinking, oh gosh, he can't feel very good about this, right? About their whole year reflection of the year had to do with her every accomplishment. I mean, every use of pronoun was about I've spent, kind of the brag letter, but associated. I'd have to read it out loud, but the intention was pure, but I really noticed the pronoun usage in it.
Yeah. So it's interesting because because I could see writing a letter like that, but I would sign it myself because it's me writing it and letting everybody know. But signing it from everybody, like me writing it and signing it from everybody, that's a totally different type of letter. And so you have,
And
you
it's
have
the
to
context
figure,
that was in the letter too, because it wasn't
yeah,
like what person they were, it was taking ownership. There was a complete taking ownership of accomplishments of the children. And
yeah,
which was almost microaggression to the children, saying
yeah,
that's just how it read. There was a lot of microaggressions in it to who owned accomplishments and who the
yeah,
parents. So
yeah.
watch your
Right.
pronouns, people.
I know. Yes. So then to continue this, the opposite of microaggressions is microaffirmations. And it is using language that is inclusive. So it's using our accomplishments, in recognition. It's actually practice active listening is so not making eye contact is a microaggression, which I never thought of it that way. So intentionally making eye contact when you're talking to people is a micro affirmation. I see you, I'm looking at you, I'm listening, I'm paying attention. Using your phone while there's a meeting going on, like that means that's a microaggression because it's like, this is not worthy of my time. But then putting your stuff away and paying attention would be a micro affirmation.
I don't know why this sticks with me, but somebody had told me I knew the person they were on the date with. I knew the two parties, but they had gone on a date. And she said the entire time he was looking at the door of the busy restaurant, wanting to know who was coming in. And think about, he was the kindest person, but she's like, talk about a microaggression. There was no interest in her. His interest was if something better was going to walk in the door. At least that's how she
Yeah.
interpreted it. And
Yeah.
such a subtle thing. And he would smile and look at her on occasion, but he was very, very interested in who was coming in the door.
Yeah.
She just felt like he was more not on a date with her, but it was a good excuse to check out other opportunities. And
Yeah.
so often when you are talking with somebody, and even if it's somebody that in passing, and let's say you're at an event and the whole time you're watching for who else is coming, right?
Yeah.
Or we've all been in situations like that you're doing small talk and maybe you are kind of bored with the conversation, but end the conversation. Don't continue it and create a microaggression by looking at another way and not giving
Right.
your attention. Just end the conversation in a nice way and move on, but don't do that.
That is such a good point. Like I was just envisioning yeah, people who are like looking for a better opportunity or even looking for an opportunity to be seen. So it's like, oh, because it could have been him being like, oh, look at this fabulous person I'm on a date. I wonder who's going to walk in and see us
Right,
so that I can like show this off
right,
because aren't I cool? And
right.
so that's a total, yeah, it's so interesting. It's interesting because it's such this micro word is so it's small stuff. And it's the small stuff, we've talked about this, the small words, even the big words, the little things matter. At Sandy, I'm sitting here thinking the small things matter with habits. The
Mhm.
small things have matter with words,
Matter.
actions, all these little things that make a difference.
And I'm the queen of multitasking because I always have it, one of my top, well, my top strength is strategic. So I'm always thinking through what I need to do at the end and how I'm going to get there. So I'll have an inclination of examples, easy examples. The kids know when they call me, if they call me, I'm highly likely in the middle of something, right? Because I'm always doing something. I'm on my computer, I'm walking the dog, and I think they do call me, but they prefer for me to call them because I tend to be dismissive and I'm multitasking while I'm talking to them. And I do try to make a point now because I do want my kids to always call me to stop what I'm doing and have a conversation, walk away from my computer. Like right where I'm sitting right now, if I pick up the phone, I really need to walk away from everything and have that conversation or say, can I call you back in 5 minutes?
Yeah,
Because why would somebody keep calling if that person's doing something else and only half listening, right?
right.
And Garrett's love language is quality time. So last night would be a great example where we'll sit down to eat and we're in the living room. The TV's not on, everything's off, but he wants to chat a little bit before we watch something on TV. And I was glancing at the newspaper at the same time. And he said, are you really reading the newspaper while I'm talking to you? And I'm in my mind thinking, what's the big deal? I was just looking at the headlines because I was trying to decide if I was gonna, like, but I mean, microaggression right there.
Yeah.
But I really need to move everything because it is back to the point on the gentleman with you saying maybe, she was reading into what he meant, right? Which let's
Yeah.
just say Garrett, he's reading in saying she has no interest in hearing what I have to say. Whereas really I've got this huge temptation because usually ours is a small town paper and I kind of want to get it in I'm literally thinking about putting it in the recycle bin. I'm glancing, thinking, is there anything noteworthy I should read? But
Yeah.
I need to put it aside, right? Or we need to sit at the table and look at each other. I'm not very well equipped if there's a lot going on. I've got to walk away from it, right?
Yeah.
So I've got to realize that and do it.
Yeah. And so most people can't multitask at all. Like it's like 1% of the population that can actually multitask. So,
Well, I'm not in that 1%.
and neither am I. I'm like so not. And and I catch myself too when the kids call. That's probably one of my biggest because they're the only ones who call me. And usually when they call me, they need something because usually we text.
Mhm.
And usually I'm doing something else. And so it's kind of a interesting scenario of yes, just walk away because sometimes I'm not doing that. And I do find myself just kind of going through the motions of the conversation until they say something that catches my attention. And then I'm like, all right, I need to like pay attention now because now we're done with all the superficial stuff. And now I need to give them some attention. And it's really disrespectful for me to do that. Like, as I'm thinking about it, it is a microaggression because I'm just like being dismissive until, okay, now it's something
Now it's
important. I
something
need,
important. The other tip somebody gave me was, and it was actually a cousin who's young. He heard me on the phone with one of my sons and he said, hey, just for fun sometime, rather than you ending the conversation, let them decide when to end it.
uh,
And it felt really weird, Amy, because I think I do say, okay, because I'm not a big phone person. Even back in the day when people talked on the phone all the time, the best thing that happened to me was cell phones and texting because I really never enjoyed it. I like face to face. I just have never been, I was never that person that somebody had to tell to get off the phone because I was on the phone all the time. But it changes the tone of the conversation when it's not always us. And this is basically with my kids, right?
Yeah.
That that I'm allowing them to decide when to hang up and not me saying, okay, we got to what you needed. I'm going to move on. I'm going
Yeah.
to sit, bye-bye.
So I'm curious. So that's leads into another segue of being intentional about stuff. But if you do something that's a microaggression, how do you make up for it? And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't thought that through. But also, if it's done to you, how do you address it?
I think first question is how do you, I think there's always room for second chances. And so if you're not called on it, try to do better the next time. And if they're even acknowledging it, I found myself saying, hey, gosh, I was in a hurry when I talked to you before. I bet you
Yeah.
feel like I was walking the dog and, losing, hey, what's on your mind, and
Yeah.
do that. If you are called on it, don't get defensive and say, oh, it's no big deal. I was just looking at the paper. Just set it
Yeah.
aside and say, I'm sorry.
Well, aside, and don't say, I didn't mean it, because then you're kind of dismissing it of,
Which is
I
my
said
best
it.
action.
Yeah, it's like, but it's like, I didn't mean it, but that doesn't matter because it made an impact.
Well, I think that would fall under get over yourself, right?
Yeah.
Back all those list of things that shouldn't be. Oh, it's no big deal. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Well, and I think I was thinking through this, if it's done to you, asking why. And I don't know if that would make them defensive or not. So, why do you ask me where I'm from? And then you can figure out what the intention is, because the intention is, oh, well, I'm from Kansas City. I just wanted to know where you lived. Or you
I
can
think
figure
you
out if
absolutely
it
said that.
is, like, I see that you're Asian. I thought you were from another country. So you can figure out if what the real intent was.
One time I was at a networking event and I did a microaggression. There was an older guy that I knew that was just a little quirky, right? But I'm very fond of him and I considered him and still consider him a friend, but he's a little quirky. And I'll just use that as the example. And one of his younger coworkers, I was by and I made and I tell you, it was nothing bad, but it was a microaggression. I said something that was like, you know, and nobody would have said, oh, that was a bad thing to say, but that's what the mosquito bite, right?
Yeah.
And the coworker looked at me and he said, John thinks a lot of you. He really, he thinks a lot of you. And I think that's where he just stopped because it's kind of like you're saying, he didn't say you're saying something negative or he wouldn't want to hear that. But what he was pointing out to me is John wouldn't say something like that about me or make a
Yeah.
little aggressive. It was just enough to take my breath away. And I'm like, you're right. I am very grateful for his friendship and his mentorship. And and then but I'm telling you that stuck with me. And I think that's all he said is, John's really fond of you.
Yeah.
And it was enough for me to know John wouldn't make a little backhanded jab like you just did. I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly what it was, but it was a microaggression. It was
Yeah.
something about his identity, something that was a backhanded compliment, like, well, you and I know type thing. And I'm so grateful that he did that because it really has helped me think through those words, right? The words that matter. And even if it wasn't big or intentional, we can make those little jabs that kind of like we're on the same page, their identity is different, right? It's,
Right.
it's kind of, I wish I could remember exactly what I said, but it was subtle.
Yeah.
But he put me in my place very nicely.
Yeah. That's a really good example because, yes, I know I've left meetings and I've looked at someone else and I'm like, well, at least we aren't blah, 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 or at least we didn't blah, 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 whatever it is. And
That's why
it,
you never need to worry about what she's thinking, right?
I know, yeah, exactly. So sometimes we're doing these things behind people's backs and it's still not good. And So the very original conversation of, do we speak up when this stuff happens? You know, what the other guy did for you left a mark. And so I do think speaking up makes a difference.
What do you have to lose, you know? And if they say, hey, you know, it's it gets back to people that are willing to have a conversation. If you ask the question, why would you ask that? You're gaining perspective too.
Right. Yes. 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 All right. Great conversation, Sandy, as always.
I think before you talk too. That's my takeaway, like how quickly when somebody's identity is maybe a little different, or you want to, I think sometimes I will say things because I want to smother them in acceptance, but sometimes you don't need to say anything. Because
Yeah.
smothering somebody's in acceptance when their identity is different can easily open the door for microaggressions.
Right. It points out the differences.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And the thing that my takeaway is this is intent is different than impact.
Ooh, I
And
like
so
that. Yeah.
your impact may not have been your intent, but you need to just be mindful.
Right, right. All right, Amy, great
All right.
conversation. Lots to think
Great.
about. Thank
Yes, it is.
you.
Thanks, Sandy. Have a good one.
Too. Bye.